Welcome to the Baseball Together podcast with your hosts, Blackjack Brad and Briggy Blue Eyes. And now, Baseball Together.
Baseball family, welcome to this week's episode, or I guess this episode. We're doing a lot more than just weekly now, Brig. So this episode of the Baseball Together podcast, we're joined by a longtime sports writer, Jamie Turner. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm still waiting for Cleveland to get warmer than 42 degrees so I can enjoy going to a ball game. Well, the sad thing is I enjoy going to a ball game when it's 42 degrees, so I'm not sure what that says about me.
Same thing it says about us. It's okay.
Now, see, I'm spoiled. It's 90. I'm in Arizona. It's 90 here right now. So I don't know if I want my weather or your weather right now because it's going to get real hot and I'm going to get real tired of it. So, but real quick, Jamie is a lifelong baseball fan. He was in sports journalism for 46 years. Was a sports editor in Reno and Honolulu. He has covered Cleveland's baseball clubs for 23 years before he retired, and he grew up a Tigers fan, and we will get into that a little bit more in just a minute. But before we do anything else, we got to get into a rundown. Are you ready to get caught in rundown, Jamie?
Sure, fire away.
All right, first question. What is your quest?
Well, a quest in Cleveland is any sports team that is halfway entertaining. And we've had some good luck, when LeBron James was playing for the Cavs, and thankfully Tito Francona was kind of made the Guardians a competent baseball organization, which is not really fair. They obviously had great success in the 90s. They just didn't get the final out of the World Series. But the quest is anything that makes Cleveland sports fans who are, I want to say they're devoted, but it's really more of an addiction. They want so badly to have something good happen for one of their teams that they anticipate it happening when there's no logical reason for that assumption to actually take place. You may, well, as we're recording this, this morning, the Browns fans found out that Joe Flacco was coming back to play quarterback for them. And you would have thought they had signed Johnny Unitas by the way they were acting. And I'm not sure Johnny Unitas, right now where he is, wouldn't be able to generate as much enthusiasm if they just said, well, the corpse of Johnny Unitas is being resurrected for the Browns. Oh, hey, that sounds great. He's a winner. So the quest is more of, I would love to see people here satisfied and happy. And maybe the Cavaliers do it this year. Maybe the Guardians surprise. I mean, they were a great story last year. Anything that makes people happy, I think that's a reasonable thing to have a quest for.
Love it.
I love it.
We're going to get into some of those things in a moment. But first, our next question for you is, what is your favorite color?
Blue. Deep blue.
Okay,
I went to Michigan.
Deep blue. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Amazing blue. Yeah.
So
Nice.
Big blue.
Big blue. Yeah. Well, Kentucky likes to say big blue, but yeah.
Yeah.
If the Tigers were a beverage, what would they be?
Well, for an awful long time, I would have said they were a perfect. Well, I don't know if you even know this soda, Verner's, which is a ginger ale made in Detroit. That is not like a ginger ale you're familiar with anywhere else because it has a little more ginger in it. It has a little kick. And it was one of those things that people were, and this is true of most locations, I'm sure it is for you guys. Every city or town or community is proud of something that it creates and it generates. And in Detroit, Verner's was one of those things. And it was proud of the Tigers in the same way. They didn't necessarily have to be really good, but they were the Tigers, and they're ours, and they're like Verner's. You don't want to drink Verner's every day, and you certainly don't want to drink Diet Verner's, because what's the point? So Burners, hey, that's a fun and it's fun. Let's go to Tiger Stadium, Comerica Park, which has a Ferris wheel for reasons defying explanation, and we can have fun. The team may not be all that good, but hey, Burners goes with everything. So that's kind of what it would be.
That's awesome.
So
if,
I gotta tell
go
you,
ahead.
we had somebody on a couple weeks ago, big Tigers fan. He's living in New York. He gave almost that exact same answer.
Really?
He did.
Well,
Yep.
I'm sorry to have copied him.
No.
No,
It's
that's
actually
great.
affirming.
I think it's fantastic. I
It's
love
great.
that. Like, that's why I was like, Verner's, I've heard that before. And you're like, it's a ginger ale. I was like, oh my gosh, that's the same one.
That's it. That's the one we heard about
Really,
last time.
he brought up Burners exactly.
He did.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought
I'd
I
have to
was
double
being
check,
pretty
but I'm like
creative, but I guess I
99%
wasn't.
sure it's Verner's.
No, and it is creative because we had never heard of it before then. And what it does for me is it tells me that the fans know the culture is so built in that you guys are on the same page. That is super cool. You could survey 100 Red Sox fans and they'd all give you different answers. But for you guys to have landed on exactly the same, that is super cool. We've never had that before. I love that. All right, Jamie, if baseball were an ice cream flavor, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction.
Okay.
Instead of ice cream, I lived and worked for 6 years in Honolulu, and I presume you guys are familiar with Hawaiian shave ice.
Oh yeah.
Which is not it's not an ice cone or it's not any of those. It is literally shaved ice, and you put all sorts of different flavors. And you can get at the bottom of your very large cone, thankfully they give you something that looks like you're eating half your arm, a lump of ice cream. So not that you haven't had your brain frozen 5 or 6 or 7 times by just eating the shaved ice, you also get to have an ice cream flavor that you can have them just put a random one in there. You don't know what it will be. And I say all that because Wednesday night, watching the Guardians and the White Sox, and yes, I know I deserve some sympathy for having to do that in a 42-degree night. But watching the Guardians and the White Sox in the 9th inning of a 3-1 game, and the bases are loaded, and Emmanuel Clase, who was God's right arm a year ago and is not that so far this season, gives up a single to left, which is certainly going to tie the game, except I forget his first name, Tauchman, the right fielder for the White Sox.
Mike
Comes
Tauchman.
around third base. There you go, Mike Tauchman. Comes around third base and blows a hammy or tears his ACL or does something horrendous. And Stephen Kwan's throw comes to Austin Hedges on a bounce, and Hedges is a little bit off the plate, and I can tell because I'm standing in the left field watching the play, or in the left field stands. He is prepared to dive at the plate to catch the runner coming home, and you can see he flinches because he looks up, and the runner's nowhere around him, and poor Tauchman is halfway down the line now. Practically, he isn't on his knees yet. He will be in a couple more steps, and is nowhere close to scoring. And I don't know that I've ever seen that before in baseball. And so, in a lot of ways, baseball is that little ball of ice cream at the bottom of the cone of shave ice, and you don't know what it's going to be like. It's there to surprise you at the end. And baseball is a very good sport for surprise, and that's one of the reasons I love it.
Same.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was his he blew his hamstring.
Yeah.
Is what happened to Tauchman there. Yeah, well, I mean, same day, the Mariners were down 5-0 going to the 8th inning against the Astros, ended up winning 7-6 in a walk-off. Like,
Right.
I fell asleep. I laid down and took a nap because I was like, this game's over. They haven't given me any reason to believe they can come back. And then sure enough, a grand slam, a I guess you could say a bloop and a blast and a walk, and there you've got your walk off. It was crazy.
Yeah, the Tigers
So
beat the Yankees this past week in the ninth inning the same way.
yeah,
Just totally out of nowhere. They have no chance. They've been uncompetitive, very literal, very illiterate of me, non-competitive. And suddenly in the ninth inning, I think, 4 or 5 runs. It was one of those
It was
two.
4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the game. Any game with a clock can't have that happen.
right.
Nobody coming into the last 3 minutes of a football game is going to score 3 touchdowns. Or if they do, it's a once in a lifetime experience. In baseball, 2 or 3 times a month, if not 2, 3 times a week. It's really, it's the great thing about the game. You may think you know what's happening in the 6th inning. You have no clue until the end of the ninth.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday is the last one with this. Yesterday, the Angels scored 8 runs in an inning against the Rays, and I'm sitting there watching this game. I kept it on, just to see, and I was like, okay, the Angels are up 10-1. This game's pretty well in hand, but the Angels scored 8 of those runs in one inning. Who's to say that the Rays aren't going to get the ball up in the wind and score 8 runs in this inning? Like, that's why I kept it on, because you don't know, especially with the wind blowing out to right field like that. It was crazy.
Yeah. And most of those runs came with two outs. They were 2-out rallies.
Yeah. All right, last question for you in the rundown. What is one unpopular baseball opinion that you have?
Probably, any sport, but it applies to baseball. Um, Players, you can't compare players through eras, which I kind of agree with. But the idea that today's players are somehow deficient in some way when they're clearly better athletes. But at the same time, and I'm kind of curious what you guys think of this, because it's a fairly recent development. But the announcement by MLB to update the all-time statistics of who's the all-time batting average champion, which now isn't Ty Cobb, and the all-time home run champion, who may or may not be Josh Gibson, and what I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but there is so much undiscovered history to the game of baseball that I kind of appreciate it when I find out information that I wasn't aware of. I grew up reading books, that the main all-time leaders in books in 1960 and 1970 are not that much different than what they are now. And
True.
but it's because an entire class of athlete was banned from having any of their statistics counted. I find that really interesting. And for people who think it's unfair, or, it upsets their way of how the world should work, should just get a life and realize, I'm sorry, Satchel Paige did a lot more than just pitch for the Cleveland Indians in 1948.
Oh, yeah.
I was at the game on Wednesday. I was walking through the Guardians kind of Hall of Fame, which they have in a plaza out in center field. And they have the signatures of all their all-time players, and Satchel Paige is one of them. And he has a plaque as an all-time Indian for that era. And the main thing it points out was he won 7 of 8 decisions at the age of 42 in his first season with the franchise, and got them into the World Series.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, he didn't just exist for 1 year. He had all those years before him for 20 some odd years. Of course he must be somewhere in the all-time baseball statistics. He has to be. Now, the challenge is to compile the statistics and find them and dig them out and put them all into a good database. But MLB is done pretty well so far. And
I agree.
and so I like the idea of having history revealed, and a lot of people in this day and age like history to be what it is when they remember it from 30 or 40 or 50 years ago.
Right.
We agree. And don't let Bob Feller hear you say that Satchel Paige got him into the World Series. He'll come up swinging.
Well, that would be a trick for Bob, but
Yeah.
although I mean, Feller, who was very jealously guarding his own legacy, he and Ted Williams and a few other players of that era were at least willing to concede that the era of black baseball was as good as it had to be, because they would barnstorm and play those guys, and sometimes against the wishes of the team owners, and you know, at least they knew and they could appreciate it. And so, yeah, I mean, Feller was an odd duck. He would sign anything, but he would also pretty much tell you that he believed that baseball was much better in his era than it was, in the years before he passed. And I would disagree with him, but I wouldn't say that the era that he pitched in wasn't really worthwhile and meant just as much to the fans then as today's baseball means to the fans now. It was just different. Okay.
Totally.
Everybody
agree.
traveled on trains. There were no, 9 days and 9 games in 10 days, going to Kansas City, Sacramento and San Diego. Couldn't do it in the trains.
Nope.
You do it now, but that's different. So
yeah. So I have a question though to kind of get things started here in the opposite in another direction. I'm curious what you think about the Guardians, like the selection of the Guardians name, because as outsiders to us, like we get where it comes from, we understand it, but we feel like there were other better options. I'm curious
as nicknames.
Yeah.
I'm of two minds of this. One, and I don't think this is really true, but I kind of would like to think that maybe it was in somebody's head. You look down a major league uniform, a home uniform that's buttoned down, right? And the name of the team often is in script across the uniform. Well, they came up with a name where the left part as you look at it, the right part of the chest, none of the letters had to change.
It's true.
GIANS.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I've seen that
Left
pointed out.
Is GUAR. And I find that with all the hoo-ha, and certainly many fans today still refer to them as the Indians and are willing to be angry, about the name change. But I think I don't understand. Well, let's go back when teams were first created in the beginning of the 20th century. It didn't matter what you named them; nobody cared.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, the names became, they were incredibly dull. They were, it's the Red Legs. Why? They wear red leg stockings.
That's right.
Yeah.
What imagination is in that? And yet that's traditional. The Red Sox and the White Sox, had less imagination since the Red Legs had been around for 50 years before they came along. And oh well, that's fine. So how teams got named over the years has been, turned into this institutional memory that just cannot be changed. When I'm thinking the Indians were supposedly named because of a player who was played in Cleveland who was Native American, except none of it's true.
Right.
None of it really happened. I mean, the player, Alexis, did exist, but he had no plan or no role in anything about how they changed the name. They were the Cleveland Naps for Napoleon Lajoie. Did everybody in Cleveland suddenly say, well, they're not the Naps anymore, so I'm not going to pay any attention to them when they became the Indians? Of course not. So, and so this idea that a franchise should maintain its nickname forever, even if it alienates or irritates or embarrasses some segment of the potential public that may buy tickets, baffles me. I don't understand the logic of it. Now, the Detroit Tigers will never have to change their name. That's fine. But thank God the Washington football team did.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you can't see the ignorance in that. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
The Indians are the same lowercase version because it's not initially belittling, except you realize that Native Americans were never Indians to themselves. Christopher Columbus came up with that idea because he thought he landed in India.
That's right.
So why, over the years, it clearly caused some pain and hardship to some members of Native American tribes. And I have no problem with the franchise saying, let's do something different. It'll probably help sell merchandise. Hey, which is more generic and more interesting to me than the City Connect jerseys, which make no sense at all in a lot of them. But so they're called the Guardians. You know why? Because there are statues on some bridges in Cleveland. But I do kind of, in my heart of hearts, kind of hope that somebody in the front office said, we don't have to change half the name. We're only moving a handful of letters over on the one side of the chest.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There it is.
Wow. Okay,
By
so
the way,
I'm going to
speaking
stay on.
real quick.
Go ahead.
I want to go with dull nicknames. I love that the Dodgers for a time were the bridegrooms. Like, what on earth?
Yeah.
The bridegrooms
And
the
they were the
come
trolley
on now.
Dodgers for a little while.
They
They were, yeah.
The Cleveland
Yeah.
Spiders.
I wanted the Spiders so bad. I know they were terrible,
but the
I
Spiders
wanted
were
that.
the worst team, perhaps, in
I know.
professional sport. So it's kind of hard to say,
all
now let's
sports.
bring back that great name. That
Yeah.
I want to
I
say,
know, and I figured that's why they didn't.
I want to say there was a year in which they committed more errors than games played.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No? Seriously?
Yes, I want to say in the late 1800s, when Cy Young was still pitching for them, they played like 120 games and had like 130 some errors. I could be. I know they had an enormous amount of errors, and they were horrible. I think they won like 30 games one year, 35 games.
Oh, my word.
So yes, the Spiders are never going to make it, but you're talking about dull names. Spider's not dull, except it's just tagged with being losing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're right. Brad, are you able to check that while you're at it?
I'm looking for it. You go.
Okay.
I'm looking for it. You go ahead.
I got one more. Let's talk about the City Connect thing, and then you said you've got a couple of stories that I'm really interested to hear. So I'll tell you our opinion first. We feel that it's a cash grab, that it is primarily driven for streetwear, not gameplay. And we're mostly okay with it as long as they aren't egregious design errors that miss the mark wildly. What do you think?
I think that's pretty much dead on. Yeah, it's the Guardians have they've renovated the stadium and done a really nice job in the last couple of years, and they have many team shops inside the stadium, and they have some really nice looking sweatshirts and jackets and stuff, all spinning off the City Connect stuff.
Right.
But to me,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why you would buy it, because it on first glance, it really doesn't have anything to resemble baseball to it.
Right.
Now the ones that had the CLE and they're the dark blue and all that, okay, fine, whatever. I don't have to see it that often. It's not that big a deal. But they have this whole even alternate outfits, and
Right.
that are there. There's a crest of the Guardian statue on one of the bridges, and I'm thinking that's really nice, but nobody's going to connect it to baseball. Once they leave town, if they're wearing it in Montreal, nobody's going to say, "Oh yeah, okay, it's the baseball team." No, they're not. So it is a cash grab to a certain extent, but look at the NBA. I mean, they're even more extreme, because they change their floors at the drop of a hat. So that,
Right.
so we can have 5 or 6 different floors. My wife and I last night were watching the Cavs playing Indiana, and her very first words out of her mouth when she saw the TV, she said, "That's a weird floor." And yeah, Indiana was playing, with one of the floors that almost look rubberized, because they have so many decals. There's nothing there that suggests that it's wood, let alone any, that you can recognize it. So yeah, professional sports, cash grab, pretty much interchangeable words, I would say.
Yeah,
Well
well, I
said.
feel like some teams do better than others getting the baseball, like grasping the baseball side. Like Seattle did a good job with it. They have a tribute to Dave Niehaus, and they have the Tridents, and they have the Pilots font on it and everything, which
I have
I
a
really
pilot's
liked about.
hat. I have a
Do ya?
pilot's hat. Now that's partly because Ball 4 was the most important sports book I've ever read. But anything that reflects their own history, their real history, is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
If there is one pet peeve, this drives me insane. I was at spring training this year, and I saw a game between the Yankees and the Tigers in Lakeland. And there were a lot of Yankees fans there, no great surprise. And that doesn't bother me. That's fine. But the number of them who were wearing jerseys that had the number 3 and the word Ruth typed over
Oh,
it, or Jeter over a 2, I would throw it away if somebody gifted me something like that was so far away from what that organization and what the franchise has meant over 120 years. That's insane. And yet people happily wear it.
did you
I-
know that
Briggs
it
over
is
having
one
a
of
spiritual
the
experience while you're preaching this, by the way.
I am having a
It's like,
spiritual
amen.
experience. It's like, oh, I got cornbread in the oven. We're going to come over after church, and we're going to have a great time. No, I agree. I have a jersey. It's a Jeter jersey. It says Jeter on the back. The only reason I have it is because it was the only one I could find, and I was going to buy a jersey that day, and so I asked every shop owner, I've asked everybody in the team stores, I've asked everybody, and they all say that unless you want replica, which is, going to cost you $250, $300, this is the only way to buy a Yankees jersey. And I thought, that's ridiculous. So now my favorite Yankees jersey is a cream-colored pinstripe with the warped old-school Yankees logo and the number 4 on the back, and that's it. And it's my Gehrig jersey, and it's exactly the way it's supposed to be, and I probably wear it once or twice a week if I can get away with it. It's just
Well, going into
No
the
names.
weeds of Yankee uniforms. Last year, all this sturm and drawn over the bad uniforms, that had all the issues with it. There was one team that I thought looked really good in them. I thought it was the Yankees. I thought their road uniforms looked like 1940s uniforms.
That's right.
I don't
That's
know
right.
why they were the only ones that looked good. because I agree, most of everybody else with the tiny lettering and all that looked terrible. But
Yeah.
I remember watching the playoffs last year when the Guardians were playing them and thinking, I just think that looks great. And I admire tradition in all things, and obviously the Yankees haven't changed much of anything. But you want to talk
Yeah.
about a cash grab? Yes, you can't buy a Jeter jersey that doesn't have Jeter on it unless you buy the $250 version. Gee, I wonder who thought
Yep.
of that. Somebody named Steinbrenner, probably.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the reason the Yankee uniforms looked so good last year is because they were the only ones that didn't have the names on the back.
Yeah.
Because the
It is the
names on the
name.
back ruined so much of the look of the jerseys, because it was all off balance and it was awkward, and I think not having the name was better for them. And like
Yeah.
the Red Sox home, and I think don't the Cubs have uniforms that don't have names on the back? Or
Correct.
they start doing that?
Yeah.
The home
Cubs and
uniforms
the
don't
Red
have
Sox.
names.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so they look better without it last year, and now the names are back, and all is right in the world. But okay, we are so far off of where we wanted to go, which is fine. This is great. We're just scraping the surface, and that means we're
Yeah.
gonna have you back, Jamie. But
Great.
this is fantastic. So stories. I want to hear. You were at the earthquake game,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep. I had
That had to
just
be
taken,
wild.
yeah. Okay, so that's 1989. I had just moved to Reno, where I was at that time a writing coach in the sports department. And I had been there for about 6 weeks, and the World Series came along, and it was going to be San Francisco and Oakland. And I had a close friend of mine that I had known for several years who was a Yankees beat writer, and he covered all World Series games. And so he arranged for a ticket, not free, I paid, to be made available so I could go to game 3 in San Francisco at Candlestick Park. And so I hadn't been in San Francisco maybe twice in my life before that trip. And so I was really unfamiliar with a lot of the city, but I got there early enough. My friend allowed me to sleep in his hotel room across the bay in Berkeley, and so I took the day and I went into the city and had a great time. Walked around, saw a lot of stuff, and eventually drove to the game. Um, and I was sitting in the upper deck about halfway down between home and third, uh, probably a couple sections to the left of actual home plate. Very close. If you have any memory of Candlestick Park, because it was a dual purpose stadium, there was both a baseball press box and a football press box. And the football press box was down what would be the left field line. And it was a much larger facility than what the baseball press box was. And so all the spillover reporters would be put into the football press box. And that wasn't far from me. That was probably, maybe 30 feet from where I was sitting. And so it's what was it, 5:08 or somewhere around there, and I'm sitting
Before.
and I have a chocolate malt in one hand and the scorecard in the other, and I'm ready for them to give the starting lineup so I could start writing them down. And all of a sudden, a train started. You could hear a train passing the stadium. There are no trains at Candlestick Point, but it was a rattling,
Hmm.
and you heard the rattling before you felt it. And it was 5:08. Yes, that's right. And it was I. You could feel the upper deck start to sway, and my vivid recollection was it swayed to the right, it swayed back to the left, and then it pitched forward. And at that moment, I vividly remember thinking I might die in the next 2 seconds. That very vivid thought was in my head because you didn't know how far the upper deck was going to pitch forward. We could have all landed in the lower deck and we're all dead. 40,000 of us gone in 5 seconds. Well, it came back. It slowly came back. The tremor eased, The players say they could see the field ripple. I couldn't. I would not be able to tell you that, but that's because I was too obsessed with what I was experiencing myself. And the first reaction was uh, the entire crowd cheered because the Giants had been beaten badly in games 1 and 2, and this was an omen. The Giants were going to come back because, by God, we deal with earthquakes here, as if Oakland doesn't deal with earthquakes.
Right.
And I'm making light of that because Oakland suffered probably more than San Francisco did in a lot of ways because of the earthquake, and so I don't want to make too much levity of that. But in the moment, that's how people were reacting, and it was probably about 4 or 5 minutes later. One, the power left the stadium. And two, people started looking at these really cool new inventions called Watchmans. Anybody remember a Watchman? It was a little TV in the size of a transistor radio. And you had its own antenna. And of course, there was no cable that mattered for baseball, and so you could look at what the local news was saying. And they were showing pictures of the Bay Bridge having one of its panels collapse. And that started making everybody realize, oh, this is a lot worse than what we're thinking it is. And and then what happened after that, and this all happens in about 25 minutes. So between 5:08 and 5:30, the power goes out. They're not going to be playing baseball if they don't have any lights. And I thought, after thinking about all this for a second, it occurred to me, wait a second, I'm a journalist. I should be calling my office and seeing what they want. I was there as a fan. I wasn't doing anything other than just ready to enjoy a ball game. And I went into the football press box, which at this point was empty because no place made more noise during the earthquake than a press box that had large plate glass windows in front.
Ooh. People
there were so scared, they panicked. Everybody cleared. And so I'm not sure, I want to say it was a New York paper. I don't honestly know if that's true, but they got a charge for a long distance call for me to call back to Reno because I borrowed their phone and called Reno and said, hey, what do you want me to do? And they said, have they called the game? I said, not yet, but they will. They can't possibly. They have no power. And they said, well, go down to the Marina District. As if I knew where the Marina District was.
Right. Of course, everybody knows.
Yeah, sure, everybody will know that. And so I said, sure, no problem. Okay. Just get in a car and start heading to San Francisco, and you'll figure it out once you get there. And it took a long time to get out of the parking lot, which is not a great surprise. Once they made the announcement that the game was over, you already had half the attendance is already out in the parking lot because they didn't want to be inside the stadium. They didn't know what was going to happen next. They knew enough to know that there were going to be more aftershocks. And if there were aftershocks, the stadium might not be as a happy place as it was for the first one, for the big shock. So it took a while, but I had the advantage of going someplace nobody else wanted to go because all the news reports were terrible things were happening in San Francisco. There was a house on fire in the Marina District. Department stores had all their glass blow out and the streets are littered with glass. There might be marauding, throngs of gangs who are going to break into every store. None of that was true. But it kind of helped keep people from wanting to drive back into the city. So I finally get on US 101 heading into the city. And if you've ever been to Candlestick Park, it doesn't have a view of the city. There are hills between the ballpark and the city. So you have to drive a little ways on the freeway before you come around a bend, and San Francisco kind of appears right in front of you. And Brig is nodding, so I'm assuming
Mm-hmm.
he has the experience. And I came around that curve, and there were a lot of cars coming out. There was no cars going in. I was the only car going in, as far as I could tell. And I came around the curve, and I saw a city in silhouette. There was no power in San Francisco, but there was a fire in the marina, which is on the north side of San Francisco. And so it
Wow.
backlit the city with an orange glow. The
Whoa.
only lights were the emergency beacons on the top of the Prudential and the other large skyscrapers. And I want to say that made it kind of more intimidating. It now became more exciting for me because it's like, holy crap, this is going to be really interesting. And and I got into the city, and I can't imagine. I've written this story more than once in the years since. I can't imagine a city that handled itself better than San Francisco did in a emergency situation. Normal people were out serving as traffic cops at intersections, major intersections where there is no traffic light anymore, waving cars through and keeping everything going. There were people, I want to think they were shop employees who went out and brought out large brooms and there was a lot of broken glass, but they were sweeping it into the gutters and clearing the streets. It wasn't the city employees doing it. They were probably, it was probably hard for them to even get trucks out because they couldn't get garage doors open.
Yeah.
But there was so much calm to it. I stopped in the main square. And I'm forgetting the name at the moment, but the big one downtown that has Chinatown on one side and all the big hotels were down there. And I just I walked around a little bit just to get a kind of a sense of things, and people were just helpful. They were uniformly helpful. And they pointed me in the right direction to how to get the marina, which is one of the reasons I also stopped. I got to the Marina District probably 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and they had a staging area for the media, yeah, on the border of the Marina District, and for just to catch people up who aren't old enough to remember this, the marina was built on landfill. And as the city grew, it kind of expanded out into the San Francisco Bay. The problem with that is that earthquakes are much worse on landfill and sand than it is in solid rock. Solid rock may fracture, but sand liquefies.
Right.
And so as I walked through the Marina District, I was aided by a San Francisco Chronicle food writer who lived nearby. She was a little afraid of the dark. I was afraid of getting lost. So we kind of counterbalanced each other well, and she guided me, and
Nice.
I protected her. And there was nothing to protect her from, but that's the way it goes. And what you
Yeah.
found was there were a lot of 3-story buildings that were suddenly 2.5 stories. Half the building has sunk 3 feet into the ground. Walls of buildings that were on the corners of streets had fallen away. If you were living in an apartment building in the middle of a block, you were fine because the buildings on either side of you held your structure together.
Wow.
And so you could walk down the street and look up, and you could see the entire the layout of every apartment. You could see their bathroom, their bedroom, their living room, their kitchen. You could see it all. It looked like the outside of a dollhouse, a very large dollhouse. I interviewed firefighters. There's plenty of video on YouTube of the big fire that was in the Marina District. It was one very large apartment, multi-residence. I don't think it was an apartment building. I think it was like a 4-family unit that burned down. And I remember talking to one of the firemen because he said they would have been able to save everybody. I think 2 people died there, except that the water pressure wasn't big enough and everybody knew it and nobody had ever gotten it fixed. And so they couldn't put enough water on the fire to put it out,
Wow.
which is, the guy was heartbroken, because he recovered the bodies. Uh, and not to end this with that depressing thought, I will give you this more about the quality of the people who went through this. We were walking through a residential area where there was a family having a cookout on their driveway for all the kids in the neighborhood whose parents were stuck somewhere because they might have been over in Oakland and the Bay Bridge you couldn't use anymore. So
Right.
there were parents who were just not home. And so this one family is got their little hibachi out and they're cooking hot dogs for probably a dozen kids. And I started chatting with them, and the dad had a pair of eyeglasses that had flashlights on either side of the glass of the frames, and he was inspecting his house for cracks. And thankfully they escaped most of it. And he said, "You want to go inside and look around, see what happened?" I said, "Of course I do."
Yeah.
And so I went in, and they had in their kitchen, they obviously collected teapots, and they had them on little solo shelves in an angle down the wall. And you kind of imagine how they would have had that for these various teapots. And the teapots survived, but every one of them had a lid that had popped off in the same way. Every one of them had a lid that was on an angle, popped up. They had one cabinet in a different room. I don't know why this room was different than the kitchen, but one cabinet that toppled over. But they had a study with a working phone. And I said, "Could I use this? I need to call into my office and give them information," because I was dictating everything I was going to give them. And he said, "Sure, no problems. There's no light. I'm sorry about that. I can give you a flashlight, but we don't have any power." "Okay, that's fine." So I'm calling. I'm on the phone with Reno, and I'm starting to give them quotes and observations. And this father opens the door very quietly. He doesn't want to bother me, but he kind of taps me on the shoulder. And I say, "Hold on a second." I turn to him, and he says, "We're going to open the wine cellar. You want anything?"
We've decided today's the day.
Exactly. And it was that moment that I thought, San Francisco is a pretty great place.
Yeah, we're going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. Candlestick was my favorite ballpark for a lot of years because it didn't fall down.
There you
They
go.
did retrofit it. They did put in, earthquake protection. And I think if you've ever seen the ESPN 30 for 30 on the earthquake game, there were a number of personalities, Berman and Bob Lee and a couple others, who were saying, "Well, we were sitting up in the upper deck, under the roof, such as it was, and that could have fallen down if they hadn't put that in the retrofits. We would all die. Well, so would have I. I was in the same place as they were." But
Wow.
it didn't fall down. It took, I think, 9 days for them to start the World Series up again. I actually covered a 49ers game that was played in Palo Alto at Stanford that following Saturday because our regular college writer didn't want to drive in there. He was still kind of concerned. And so I
Yeah.
covered the 49ers doing, I don't even remember who they played. But I still have a program. I still have a ticket from the game. I never used it. I never went back. Uh, but it is one of the most influential moments of my life, just because it eventually got me to be a sports editor in Reno 6 months later. And decided, well, this guy handled an earthquake. He can probably be a sports editor. So I got promoted, and that changed the course of my career. And 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 it was baseball, and it was memorable, and people kind of like hearing about it. And so there you have the I don't know how many minutes I've extended your program, but podcast, but
That's great.
that's pretty much I've told it enough times that I didn't have to wait for questions. I just kind of moved along.
That's
A
fantastic.
true professional.
Well, I love, honestly, like, that we didn't just get the stadium. Like,
Yeah.
I'm all about that. That was really cool. That was
Yeah.
very
Thank you.
insightful, and a lot of
Thank
things
you for
that
sharing
we
all of
had
that.
no idea. Yeah, thank you for that. That was
It really was
amazing.
a life-changing experience in so many ways that it also reinforced the idea that people are actually pretty good when they're put to the test.
Yeah.
I mentioned in passing the problems Oakland had, and that was when the double-decker freeway collapsed in Oakland. And the people who were the emergency responders were regular people. It took a while for ambulances and fire and all those folks to get there because, there was no easy way to get to a place where the freeway had collapsed. And people just brought ladders out and started climbing up into the structure to try to find people to help. And they found one gentleman. Well, they found a few people. The 30 for 30 has the one fellow who was extracted and with many injuries, but survived. There was a lot of reporting about this one older gentleman, a retiree, who was quote unquote saved. He passed, unfortunately, 5 days later from his injuries. But it really was a reflection of, if you ever feel like, the human race, is constantly disappointing you, there are times when that's not true. And that day, from what I saw, from just calmness or willing to be helpful or willing to help out a whole block of kids and feed them, or sweeping glass, it made you feel a lot better about human nature.
It's
That's
fantastic. I love that.
Well, we're going to have
Okay,
to
we
have you
gotta-
back on. We have one last question we want to ask you.
Sure.
We want to hear your other stories. We'll do that next time. And I want to hear about Ball 4 because you've brought it up a couple of times, and that book is awesome. So I want to talk about it. But before we let you go this time, we want to know, what is your super crazy early World Series prediction?
Super early. Well, you're right about that. Uh, I don't know why I think this, other than I kind of hope it becomes true because I hate seeing. I'm sorry, Brig, but I hated the Yankees for years because they had an unfair advantage in money, and that
Fair.
Steinbrenner Jr. is complaining now that the Dodgers have too much money is pretty ludicrous.
Come on.
It's pretty
Yeah.
silly, but I just have a feeling the Dodgers are not going to repeat. And so I would say, for no particular good reason, except I think it'd be really interesting World Series, I'll take the Mets and who do I want out of the American League? Uh, the Mets and the Orioles. For no good reason, because the Orioles haven't started really very well at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are so many teams that have bad starts and come back to be in the playoffs. I'm not eliminating
for sure.
them after 10 games, but
No, yeah.
I would think that would be fun. And yes, the Mets spent a lot of money for Soto, and the Orioles spent a lot of money, but it's all on homegrown guys for the most part, which is kind of reassuring. And it would be kind of a breath of fresh air, I think, because it'd be, TV would like it. There'd be a lot of, everybody be happy to report on it. Texas and Arizona was kind of bored people. I'm sorry to the Arizona resident, Brad. I'm sure you were
bored
excited,
me.
but it bored a lot of people, even though they were great games.
They were great games.
They absolutely were great games, but it just didn't get the buzz. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Mets in Baltimore just for giggles.
Sweet. I love it. Well, baseball family, we're going to say goodbye to Jamie, and then we will be right back with you. Jamie, this was great. Baseball family, thank you so much for joining us for that just terrific conversation with Jamie Turner. We had a great conversation before that you didn't get to hear. We had a conversation after you didn't get to hear, which is kind of nice, but also that's why we have Patreon. So if you want conversation spillover like we get, that you can get, one of the best ways to do that is to go visit us on Patreon and sign up to unlock, I guess, that extra content that we have. We have 5 tiers of support, everything from $1 to $500 a month, which is way too much, but we'll take it if you want to. We've got a lot of promises in there, but most of them which Brad made on my behalf, which we'll fulfill somehow if you decide to do that. But everybody else, doesn't matter what tier of support you jump in at, it helps the show a lot, and everybody has their own list of benefits and perks and things that you get by becoming a patron, subscribing to us that way. So anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, review the show anywhere you can get it. Don't forget that YouTube is probably the best place to consume every little bit of what we do that's not on Patreon exclusive. We drop stuff every day. We are well into our Today in Baseball tradition as we go into the season, and it is probably the best run of Today's in Baseball we've ever had. So it's been great. But anyway, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so that you don't miss anything, and we will catch you on Tuesday.